A single snapshot taken in 1985 reveals the whole story. It shows a youthful mother cradling her infant girl amid jaw-dropping opulence somewhere in Greece. Fast forward 3 years, and that woman passed away, leaving her unsuspecting child with a massive unearned fortune and an inescapable curse of heartbreak. While the Onassis moniker represented absolute authority, massive maritime businesses, and exclusive retreats, the ladies born into it endured a far bleaker reality. Christina Onassis witnessed the death of her entire household before reaching age 30. Her child, Athena, received an inheritance so gigantic it required constant security details, leading to such extreme loneliness that she constantly strived to escape her family identity. Here we explore the journey of mothers and daughters who possessed every material luxury imaginable, yet lacked all the priceless things in life. An empire constructed entirely on the ocean. Entering a glamorous reality most folks only witness on screen, Christina Onassis took her first breath inside a Manhattan medical center on December 11, 1950. Aristotle Onassis, her father, was actively constructing what would ultimately grow into a globally dominant maritime enterprise, commanding massive vessels transporting crude from the Middle East across to European and American shores. Furthermore, her mother, Athena Livanos, universally nicknamed Tina, hailed from a prominent maritime aristocratic background too. Stavros Livanos, the patriarch on her mother's side, originally established his very own maritime empire. As a power couple, her parents commanded enormous vessels transporting petroleum across global waters, managing freights that sustained countries, accumulating wealth capable of purchasing private lands and swaying politicians. Consequently, growing up was completely far from ordinary for Christina. Rather than having a standard kids' room, she claimed luxurious quarters spread across numerous lavish estates. Instead of a single home base, her living spaces spanned multiple time zones, with every location easily surpassing an average person's grandest fantasies. From Paris to Athens, Antibes to Monte Carlo, and right into New York. Wherever elite society congregated, this prominent clan firmly planted their flag. A significant chunk of her childhood unfolded aboard their personal megaboat, a spectacular cruising mansion bearing her name. Originally a Canadian military vessel, they completely transformed it into what felt like a boutique 5-star resort. Solid gold completely covered the restroom hardware, while authentic masterpieces from Picasso and various legendary painters decorated the interiors. Guests could enjoy a stunning mosaic pool, which easily emptied out to double as an elegant ballroom floor. Ludwig Bemelmans, the celebrated illustrator behind the Madeline series, personally designed the aesthetics of her on-board recreational space. Christian Dior's legendary brand custom-tailored the clothing for her massive, multi-dozen collection of dolls. Furthermore, her personal riding ponies were actually extravagant presents given to her father by the Saudi king. However, unimaginable riches cannot shield a person from suffering. It merely alters the anguish, making it highly conspicuous and entirely exposed. Paparazzi shots land on many more front pages, and the scandalous rumors circulate significantly faster. Emotional injuries happen right under the media spotlight. Her older sibling, Alexander, entered the world back in 1948. Since his very first breath, he received rigorous training to eventually inherit the maritime business, become his father's successor, and uphold the family legacy. Christina completely idolized her big brother, tagging along right behind him constantly during their toddler years, holding him in the incredibly high regard typical of an adoring little sibling. A massive fleet of domestic workers practically raised them, including strict instructors drilling them in French, English, and their native tongue, academic mentors forcing them through rigorous math and history lessons, alongside security personnel tracking absolutely every single step they took. The patriarch constantly focused on business, endlessly jet-setting, and perpetually glued to the receiver striking multi-million-dollar agreements that impacted massive workforces. He routinely vanished for lengthy corporate excursions, only to show up weeks later bearing lavish presents alongside tales of high-stakes bargaining in overseas metropolises. Her mother did her best to provide some grounding, attempting to manufacture a semblance of traditional domesticity despite the constant presence of boats, mansions, and limitless employees. Yet achieving any ordinary routine proves impossible when the paparazzi relentlessly hound your kids, plastering your most intimate daily routines across global tabloids. She bounced between incredibly pricey prep academies, constantly transferring whenever her father's corporate ventures forced the household to pack up and move. She spent time at New York's Hewitt School, a place designed to mold the girls of stateside tycoons into perfectly polished debutantes. She also passed through St. George's College over in Lausanne, Switzerland. That elite institution catered exclusively to the offspring of European nobles. Later came Queen's College in London, although she barely lasted a couple of months there, ultimately failing to remain settled long enough to fit in properly, forge permanent friendships, or discover any identity outside her immense inheritance. Eventually, the crumbling foundation of her parents' relationship grew far too obvious to sweep under the rug. Her father's romantic entanglement with celebrated vocalist Maria Callas splashed across front pages globally. Callas basically reigned as the absolute top opera star of that era, widely praised for her incredible roles in La Traviata and Tosca, and she quickly turned into Aristotle's ultimate infatuation. He chased after her without any restraint, buying her mountains of diamonds and hosting her on his yacht, entirely ignoring his vows to Tina. Paparazzi snaps of the cheating couple ended up plastered across absolutely every single tabloid and daily publication imaginable. Christina could only look on as camera crews staked out their residences, while cheap celebrity rags mercilessly picked apart her household's intimate affairs, forcing her mother to endure horrific embarrassment right in front of a completely captivated global audience. Tina Livanos did her absolute best to keep her head high and protect her kids from the fallout. However, you really cannot hide kids from such an enormous media circus. At 9, Christina fully grasped what those hushed whispers actually meant. She definitely possessed the maturity to notice her mom's absolute heartbreak. She easily knew to despise the paparazzi and her dad's new woman. Her parents ultimately divorced in 1960, right around her 10th birthday. Packing up the kids, Tina relocated to England, desperately hoping to find a quiet life away from the spotlight. By 1961, she wed John Spencer Churchill, the 11th Duke of Marlborough, an English nobleman who provided the exact type of calm, dignified existence Aristotle consistently failed to deliver. Meanwhile, Aristotle heavily flaunted his famous romance with Maria Callas for years. Yet in 1968, he absolutely stunned the globe by marrying a completely unexpected bride, Jacqueline Kennedy, the widow of President John F. Kennedy. Their union created international shockwaves, completely hijacking the media narrative for several consecutive months. America's previous First Lady getting hitched to a massively wealthy ocean freight billionaire from Greece. America's elite merging with foreign billionaire cash. Both Christina and Alexander absolutely hated the union. The siblings begged their dad to cancel the wedding. They found Jackie incredibly shady, assuming she just wanted a payday, and felt she could never step into their mom's shoes or match his previous flame. Even though PR reps claimed everything was fine and holiday photos painted a happy picture, Christina and her new stepmom shared a freezing, tense dynamic filled with deep suspicion right up until her dad passed away. To complicate things further, her mom Tina ended up making a totally jaw-dropping decision of her own. Back in 1971, she left the Duke and wed Stavros Niarchos, an insanely rich Greek tycoon who happened to be her ex-husband's absolute biggest corporate rival. Complicating matters, Stavros had previously been married to Tina's sister Eugenia, who passed away mysteriously back in 1970. Although officially called a fatal barbiturate overdose, rumors swirled around domestic violence and the shady events of that fatal evening. Watching her mother wed her late aunt's husband and suddenly gaining this rival billionaire as a stepdad struck Christina as an incredibly massive backstab. Once the young woman hit her early 20s, Her family dynamics resembled a dramatic theater script. You had her dad settling down with an American icon, her mom marrying her dad's biggest rival, who was also her deceased aunt's former husband. Her sibling Alexander cut ties almost entirely with both parents. Meanwhile, she was stuck squarely in the crossfire, witnessing their toxic household drama unfold across international tabloid covers. At just 20 years old, she experienced her first real romance, or at least something resembling deep affection. She fell for Joseph Bolker, an LA property developer. He was 47, legally separated, and raising 4 girls. The guy had charisma and genuinely valued her personality over her famous last name. They eloped in Las Vegas during July 1971. Aristotle completely blew a gasket. An older American realtor wasn't exactly the dream partner he wanted for his little girl. He fully expected her to wed a fellow marine transport heir to solidify corporate alliances and lock down their generational wealth. He bullied her constantly, turned her world upside down, promised to disinherit her, and stated she was completely dead to him if she stayed with the guy. Exactly 9 months after the wedding, the couple signed divorce papers. She picked her dad instead of her spouse, prioritizing the dynasty's reputation far above her personal joy. This toxic cycle kept repeating for the rest of her days. 2 years later, in January 1973, her entire universe completely shattered. Alexander was flying a tiny amphibious Piaggio aircraft, departing the Greek capital for what looked like a completely standard trip. A catastrophic issue occurred. The aircraft crashed right after liftoff, leaving Alexander with massive, life-threatening cranial trauma. Paramedics rushed him to the ER, yet his wounds proved fatal. He passed away 24 hours later, without ever waking up. Barely 24 at the time, he stood as the golden child, the guy destined to take over the Maritime Corporation and keep the dynasty alive. Officials thoroughly probed the accident. Investigators scoured the debris, questioned bystanders, and broke down every single potential trigger. The official verdict blamed mechanical failure, citing a glitch within the aircraft's controls. However, Aristotle outright rejected that theory. He became paranoid about foul play, convinced an assassin had rigged the vehicle to murder his boy. The billionaire brought in independent detectives, pushed for deeper investigations, and stubbornly denied the possibility of a random, heartbreaking mishap. The actual facts meant nothing. Alexander was gone. The favorite kid, the groomed successor, the young man destined to give their family brand real meaning outside of cold cash and cargo vessels. Dead at 24, stripped away before he could ever live up to the massive potential his dad spotted in him, long before getting a chance to call his own shots. Aristotle was utterly crushed, falling into a depression that fundamentally changed his personality. Friends claimed he aged 10 years in a single week. That inner fire that pushed him to construct his billion-dollar kingdom vanished. That non-stop hustle that dragged him out of Turkish slums to rank among the globe's richest individuals simply faded out. Losing his boy and corporate replacement snapped a vital piece of his soul that forever stayed broken. Pivoting to his daughter, he immediately started training her to run the corporate giant instead of her brother. She was barely 22, still mourning her sibling's tragic passing, yet her dad abruptly demanded she fill those massive expectations, forcing her into a leadership role she was never supposed to want. They shipped her off to Manhattan to grind at the corporate headquarters on Fifth Avenue. Aristotle's closest confidants basically put her through a maritime business boot camp. She tagged along on corporate travels to observe high-stakes bargaining firsthand, getting a feel for captain oversight and the massive gears driving their maritime monopoly. Yet they both quietly understood she could never replace her brother. That unspoken truth hung heavily over their heads. Her sibling was literally bred to take over the throne. Meanwhile, her upbringing focused entirely on scoring a prestigious husband to secure lucrative partnerships with rival maritime tycoons. She felt completely out of place, fully aware her dad only mentored her out of desperation, not actual faith in her talent. Even so, She gave it her all, pulling massive overtime at their main office down in Monaco. She absorbed everything regarding freight agreements, shipping lanes, petroleum investments, and liability coverage, basically mastering the endless little logistics required to keep a massive armada afloat. Her main goal was showing her dad she had what it takes, ensuring her brother's passing didn't tank their legacy, and keeping their surname alive. Then, come October 1974, barely 18 months following her siblings' passing, she received a devastating call she would never forget. Her mom had been discovered lifeless inside a Parisian inn at merely 45 years of age. Authorities publicly blamed cardiac arrest, yet the medical examiner's report revealed something completely different. It turned out a lethal combination of sedatives triggered severe fluid buildup in her lungs, ending her life. No one really knew if she did it on purpose or slipped up. Her total misery being married to Stavros was definitely obvious, though. She was fighting intense personal struggles, completely consumed by the sorrow of losing her beloved son. Regardless of whether she purposely swallowed those extra medications or just made a fatal mistake, the outcome didn't change. The young woman was left motherless, suddenly acquiring a $77 million fortune, wrapped up in agonizing heartbreak. Over a span of merely 29 months, both her sibling and mom were gone. They were the only ones who truly grasped the bizarre reality of growing up ridiculously wealthy under that famous family banner. Media outlets started tossing around the idea of a dark family hex, highlighting the relentless wave of disasters trailing them. To her relatives, however, it was simply an agonizing nightmare. Before even hitting 25, she found herself isolated alongside her dad, while the universe apparently targeted everyone she cared about. Shortly after, in March 1975, a severe lung infection claimed his life too. In reality, his physical condition had been steadily crashing the moment he lost his son. Passing away at 75, he bequeathed a sprawling monopoly valued around $500 million. She ended up with 55% of the pie, while the remainder funded a charity honoring her late sibling. His surviving spouse, Jackie Kennedy, walked away with $26 million after working out a legal agreement. However, the massive chunk of their wealth, the entire corporate fleet, and a mountain of stressful duties landed squarely on her shoulders. At merely 24 years of age, she started hunting for something genuine. She honestly put in serious effort to run the maritime monopoly exactly how her dad always envisioned. Desperate to show she deserved to carry the family torch, she spent her days at the Monaco home base, diving into heavy boardroom debates and calling the shots on major freight and travel logistics. Plenty of folks doubted her competence, wondering if a girl her age had the chops to steer that colossal enterprise. She completely shut down the haters, keeping the profits rolling in for years. Yet, the corporate grind never fulfilled her. Wealth couldn't fix her problems. Overwhelmed by a crushing sense of isolation, she constantly hunted for affection with all the wrong crowds. Hailing from a heavily influential Hellenic maritime clan, he looked like the exact type of guy her dad would stamp with approval. The whole thing felt orchestrated, just a merger between two nautical powerhouses. It crashed after 14 months. Then, in 1978, she totally stunned her entire social circle. She wed Sergei Kalzov, a Soviet maritime broker she originally crossed paths with while talking business over in Moscow. The guy was an incredibly low-ranking government worker with an extremely ordinary lifestyle, known for casually popping out his fake eyeball around other people. Plus, he crashed in a tiny two-room flat alongside his mom. Perhaps she liked that he actually seemed interested in her personality rather than chasing her famous last name or massive bank account. Or maybe he simply offered a level of basic respect her exes completely lacked. Honestly, she might have just been frantically looking for an exit from her predetermined destiny. Their August 1978 wedding took place in the Russian capital, and she squeezed right into that cramped maternal living space. She bailed after a mere 4 days, although the guy chased her back to the free world, where they struggled to salvage things for a bit. They split up after 16 months, officially divorcing in May 1980. Rumor has it she handed over an entire vessel to finalize the agreement. People even whispered that he was secretly working for Soviet intelligence this whole time, tasked with infiltrating her inner circle to gather secrets. Reality likely rests somewhere in the middle. Throughout every single wedding, and her frantic search for genuine human bonds, she secretly wrestled with profound inner turmoil that remained completely hidden from the public eye. Body image issues plagued her relentlessly, draining her mental and physical stamina. She would heavily restrict her eating, basically fasting for weeks on end, shedding massive amounts of pounds only to regain every ounce and then some once the sadness crept back and she turned to emotional eating. This brutal loop just kept going, serving as a visible mirror for the deep psychological chaos she simply could not tame. Doctors officially told her she had clinical depression when she turned 30, but her close friends could have easily confirmed she had been in deep pain for a very long time. Medical professionals handed out downers to calm her nerves, stimulants to shed pounds, and sedatives since her racing thoughts kept her up at night. She developed a heavy dependency on every single medication. She popped stuff just to get out of bed, push through her afternoons, drift off, and bury her deep sense of isolation. Taking too much landed her in the ER on multiple occasions, though her relatives did their best to sweep those scares under the rug. Reporters either figured it out or had strong hunches, so rumors trailed her constantly, calling her an erratic mess of an heiress crumbling under her own wealth. She became the doomed heiress, tearing her own life apart right before everyone's eyes. Word was she drank 20 sodas daily. That massive intake of sweet, caffeinated liquid acted as just one more coping mechanism. Tears flowed constantly. Close pals mentioned she would suddenly burst out crying out of nowhere, suffocated by an eternal sense of sorrow. Chatting with a reporter following her dad's passing, she admitted her entire world was gone. Her dad, her mom, and her brother were dead, leaving her totally isolated, as she put it. Even with mountains of cash, luxury boats, sprawling estates, endless staff, and a massive corporate kingdom, she hit the nail right on the head. Still, she yearned for just a single prize. She craved a baby, somebody to adore her without any strings attached, a person who would actually stay by her side. It was her last shot. Come March 1984, she walked down the aisle yet again. Her new groom was a dashing, cultured guy from a wealthy French medicine dynasty who ran a men's fashion agency over in Paris. The two grew up together and shared a long history of friendship. At first glance, this union actually looked like it had a fighting chance. On the 29th of January 1985, she finally welcomed a baby girl into the world. She called the newborn after her own mom, keeping the ancestral title alive in true Hellenic style. For a fleeting second, she possessed her ultimate dream. Her very own kid, and a household she could run her way. Yet her relationship was already crumbling. Her husband was sleeping around with a gorgeous woman from Sweden. He even had 2 secret kids with his mistress during his legal union. Finding out about the cheating utterly crushed her. They immediately split and filed the paperwork to dissolve their ties forever. She held on to full guardianship of her little girl, diving into parenthood with a fierce devotion she personally never experienced growing up. Her primary goal was to be hands-on, refusing to pawn her kid off on hired help or tutors. She aimed to provide the exact thing she always missed: an involved caregiver, a solid home life, and an upbringing resembling normality. Unfortunately, her substance abuse issues still lingered, while relentless gloom, devastating tragedies, toxic breakups, and the immense pressure of carrying her family legacy continued to plague her. Sometime in November 1988, she took a trip to see pals at a rural property near the Argentine capital. By the 19th, a housekeeper discovered her slumped inside the tub. She was completely passed out and wouldn't wake up. Paramedics rushed her to get medical help, but she was already gone. Her life tragically ended at just 37. The medical examiner ruled out intentional harm, murder, and lethal intoxication. Officially, a severe fluid buildup in her lungs triggered a fatal cardiac event. Decades of starving herself, popping meds, and enduring immense heartbreak finally took their toll. They laid her to rest on their private Greek island next to her dad and sibling. Her passing left an enormous fortune, valued around $250 million. She also left a tiny toddler who now had to shoulder their family's infamous dark cloud completely by herself. The wealthiest toddler on the planet. Literally, overnight, that little girl turned into one of the richest miners alive. Barely out of diapers, she was handed her mom's entire empire, meaning she now owned private land masses, real estate, corporations, massive shipping businesses, and global cash reserves. Reporters quickly dubbed her the wealthiest kid around, yet her true inheritance consisted of deep loneliness and heartbreak. After all, her mom never really had faith in her ex-husband. Long before their marriage officially ended, the mother had already put safeguards in place to secure the young girl's financial future. A panel of Greek fiduciaries was designated to manage the fortune until the heiress celebrated her 18th birthday. Every single dime the father wanted to use for his child required authorization from these managers. This crucial move ended up defining the girl's youth completely. Taking his daughter away, the father retreated from the media spotlight to the greatest extent possible. He tied the knot with Marianne Landash, a Swedish model he had secretly dated while still wed to his former wife back in 1990. Barely 24 months following his ex-wife's passing, the new couple welcomed a pair of babies into the world. The arrival of Eric, along with twins Sandrine and Johanna, provided the young heiress with a stepbrother and a couple of stepsisters. Her father pushed hard for a standard upbringing, though it was a highly subjective kind of ordinary, considering the kid possessed a multi-million-dollar fortune. Relocating to Switzerland, the family enjoyed a cozy lifestyle that actually seemed rather modest compared to typical ultra-wealthy elites. Instead of enrolling in fancy private academies, the wealthy girl went to standard public educational institutions. Yet describing her schooling as typical is quite an exaggeration. Ex-military specialists skilled in hostage prevention and counterterrorism escorted her absolutely everywhere. These men kept their eyes on her relentlessly, tracking every single step she took. The protective barrier they maintained served as a constant reminder that her life was radically different from her peers. Chauffeured around in an armored luxury vehicle, heavily tinted glass ensured absolute privacy from the outside world. Daily travel paths were mapped out and constantly altered to stop potential abductors from spotting a routine. Anyone approaching her faced intense background checks and strict surveillance. Such was daily life for the wealthiest female child on the planet. Wealth provided extreme security at the cost of intense loneliness. Her dad demanded she receive the exact same allowance as the other kids. Her wardrobe consisted of average outfits, entirely devoid of high-end brands or showy elements. Household duties were mandatory, requiring her to pitch in and remain humble regardless of the massive wealth coming her way. Outwardly, the goal appeared to be raising a well-adjusted, unentitled kid. However, a completely different issue was secretly unfolding. Her father remained locked in endless battles against the Greek board members to get his hands on the trust funds. The financial committee established over in Liechtenstein held veto power over every single purchase he attempted for the girl. Those administrators highly suspected his motives, believing he planned to siphon the kid's fortune for personal gain. They interrogated every single withdrawal application he submitted. He repeatedly warned them about relocating everyone to France, seeking tighter authority and much better tax benefits. This non-stop financial warfare served as the permanent scenery of the heiress's youth. Raised with the awareness of her uniqueness, she fully understood a massive trust fund awaited her, and that her well-known mother suffered an early, heartbreaking demise. At the same time, she lived alongside brothers and sisters free from the heavy family legacy. Escaping the intense guard details and legal fights, those children experienced a carefree youth that completely eluded her. Witnessing her siblings enjoy ordinary lives must have hurt deeply, especially since her own existence involved strict security measures. and the heavy burden of an unasked-for identity. A noticeable change occurred the moment she hit age 13. Reaching an age of deeper comprehension regarding her status, she testified during legal hearings about her intense dislike for her Hellenic roots. During a rare media sit-down with a publication in Italy, the teen pointed the finger entirely at her famous surname for her troubles, rejecting her identity as an heir to both her mother and her famous grandfather. Viewing herself merely as a kid burdened by a toxic inheritance, she strongly desired a total escape from that world. Equestrian activities were her sole source of happiness. Having ridden since toddlerhood, being on horseback provided the closest thing she had to tranquility. Relocating to Brussels at 17 to chase a professional riding career, she left Switzerland far behind. Escaping her dad's strict grip, she began forging her own path, and eventually crossed paths with a Brazilian rider nicknamed Doda. This good-looking guy boasted serious credentials in the riding circuit, and happened to be 12 years her senior. The heiress tumbled completely head over heels, much to her father's massive displeasure. Convinced the older man was merely a gold digger, her dad considered the entire romance a colossal blunder. In response, he attempted to lock down her finances to force her reliance on him. Fortunately, wealth wasn't the only trait passed down by her mom. A fierce, headstrong nature was in her blood as well. Reaching 18 on January 29, 2003, the young woman finally took charge of her estate. While the exact total of her assets stayed hidden from the press, insiders guessed her net worth hovered around $1 billion or higher. Her massive portfolio included luxury estates, commercial lodging, and private land masses scattered across the Aegean waters. New York's Olympic Tower, along with massive corporate shares spanning 4 continents. Her assets included 217 bank accounts, 87 businesses, plus 38 massive shipping vessels. Furthermore, she received the legal authority to run the Aristotle Onassis Foundation, a philanthropic group her grandpa started to honor his late son. However, upon reaching 21 years of age, the directors completely rewrote their bylaws. The executives stripped away her guaranteed presidency. Their reasoning was that she lacked any grasp of Hellenic customs, couldn't speak the language, and ignored her roots. They claimed she simply wasn't qualified to lead such a prestigious national organization. Ultimately, she never assumed her destined position there. That dismissal hurt deeply, validating every negative feeling she held regarding her famous family name. That famous name was a massive burden, definitely not a heritage. The money was an anchor, not a blessing. Seeking an ordinary life, she wed Doda Miranda in Sao Paulo, Brazil, on December 3, 2005. Their extravagant wedding hosted 700 attendees, primarily composed of high-profile Brazilian elites and friends from the competitive horseback riding circuit. Her dad and stepmom completely skipped the event. Meanwhile, the newlyweds requested charitable donations rather than traditional wedding presents. Following the nuptials, she officially adopted the moniker Athena Onassis de Miranda. She relocated to Brazil, poured massive funds into a local ranch, and fully committed to competitive horse jumping. The duo flew around the globe to participate in top-tier riding tournaments, crafting a lifestyle that appeared incredibly ordinary to casual observers. They co-managed AD Sport Horses, an equine breeding and coaching facility located in Belgium. Over 11 years, the couple rode side by side, grew their shared enterprise, and genuinely appeared to thrive. She practically vanished outside the horseback riding scene. She refused all press chats and deliberately dodged the gossip rags. She was finally living her dream of escaping her famous heiress status. But suddenly, during 2016, her whole world shattered. A former sex worker from Belgium reached out to a close acquaintance named Alexis Manthekis, handing over a thick dossier. The folder proved an 8-year affair, packed with lodging invoices, plane tickets, and candid snapshots. Fed up with his toxic antics and sick of hiding in the shadows, she simply wanted to blow his cover. Manthekis printed those dirty secrets in his book, The Storm in the Eye of Athena Onassis, which completely devastated her reality. Her spouse, the exact guy she had battled her own dad to marry, the partner she constructed her entire future around, had been sleeping around for basically their whole union. They split up instantly, kicking off incredibly messy and hostile legal proceedings. He fought their prenup, demanding spousal support, plus battled over custody of their shared animals. The exhausting lawsuits dragged on forever through local courts in Antwerp, Belgium, their former home base. The messy split legally wrapped up around November 2017. At 32, she found herself totally single again. By moving to Greece, she likely attempted to embrace the exact cultural roots she previously rejected, or maybe simply running from the devastating fallout of her ruined romance and the overwhelming quiet. Currently, the famous heiress is 40 years old. Her main residence sits in Belgium, though her massive real estate portfolio spans the entire planet. While she still drops into the occasional riding tournament, it's nothing like her old schedule. Back in 2012, a terrifying horseback tumble left her with severe back trauma. Even though she bounced back to ride for Greece at the 2013 Euro Games and the 2014 Global Finals, that accident permanently altered her passion for riding. People have caught glimpses of her at random high society parties lately, like during a 2021 Monte Carlo marriage ceremony, where she blended into the background completely unnoticed, plus the occasional riding meetup. But generally speaking, she has totally dropped off the radar, at least as much as a high-profile billionaire possibly could. You won't find her on any apps or doing press junkets. She strictly avoids gossip columns, unless rogue paparazzi score a lucky shot during a riding competition. She successfully mastered the disappearing act her mother couldn't. She became a ghost. But is that honestly a life? Sitting on an endless pile of cash while constantly dodging anyone who might figure out your real identity? Being the final remaining heir to an absolutely legendary 20th century family dynasty, yet desperately running away from that very bloodline. The massive fortune sits securely, handled by professional trustees and financial advisors, raking in massive profits through global freight deals, real estate, and corporate shares. However, the heiress couldn't care less about the cash. She feels zero connection to the massive monopoly her grandpa launched, or the operations her mom attempted to oversee. Ultimately, she never asked to be part of this notorious bloodline. Nobody asked if she actually wanted that massive fortune. She was merely 3 when her mom passed away, barely old enough to form real memories or grasp the tragedy. Her entire perception of her mother was pieced together using old snapshots and second-hand tales. Raised by the man who completely betrayed her mother, she grew up around kids with the same dad, though they avoided her famous last name and the heavy baggage that came with it. Even the charity she was meant to inherit completely shut her out. That union she sacrificed so much to build just resulted in pure heartbreak. Her family tree seems way more like a hex than any kind of gift. Plus, all those riches that were meant to buy the world only provided her with excuses to vanish from society. It is a bloodline defined by grief, spanning a pair of eras for these famous ladies. Christina and Athena, passing away, tore the mom and her kid apart. Yet they remain forever tied by unwanted wealth and inescapable disasters. Over a couple of incredibly brutal years, Christina watched every single relative slip away. Tying the knot 4 separate times, she was desperately looking for romance and a genuine bond, trapped in a universe where cash could buy anything but joy. She fought hard against severe sadness, substance abuse, and the suffocating isolation of standing as the final heir to her dynasty. Passing away at 37, she left a 3-year-old toddler with a massive inheritance that played out more like a prison sentence than a present. That massive wealth, along with the heartache, fell right into Athena's lap. Growing up meant constantly having security details breathing down her neck, while her teenage years were spent completely turning her back on her Mediterranean roots. As a grown-up, she desperately attempted to carve out an ordinary existence, despite living in a society where regular life just is not an option when you carry her famous title. She hitched herself to a guy she believed was loyal, only to figure out, just like her mom did, that immense wealth and genuine faith rarely go hand in hand. That massive maritime business is actually still running today, with those massive vessels hauling freight all around the globe. Those corporate ventures continue raking in cash. Meanwhile, the trust keeps bankrolling various philanthropies to honor Alexander. However, the dynasty that constructed this whole thing has completely vanished. Alexander perished in an aviation disaster at 24, while Christina succumbed to cardiac arrest at 37. Aristotle passed away at 75, ultimately stripped of every single thing that held actual value beyond simple cash. Then there is the final living heir, choosing a totally secluded existence and riding in equestrian competitions using a title she barely even acknowledges, completely dodging the paparazzi, steering clear of her family's dark history, and ducking all the baggage tied to her famous bloodline, save for the endless cash flow she cannot exactly ditch. The whole situation just carries this incredibly heavy heartbreak. It is wild how the exact riches intended to provide total independence and influence morphed right into a jail cell. How a famous title meant to pave the way simply forced her into hiding. How billions of dollars completely failed to stop disasters, purchase a single ounce of joy, or keep her relatives breathing. Leading up to her passing, Christina actually talked quite a bit about all the heartbreak she endured. She would constantly confess to whoever was around that her entire circle was gone, leaving her totally stranded, and that the cash was completely worthless. She was absolutely spot on. Every single boat, private getaway, and massive estate combined lacked the power to resurrect her sibling or her parents. That fortune failed to save her relationships, cure her deep sadness, kick her substance habits, or plug up that massive emotional hole. You will never catch Athena shedding a tear or speaking up when cameras are around. Watching her mom suffer taught her that being famous just invites pure misery. She realized that carrying her famous last name guarantees constant scrutiny, endless criticism, and zero breathing room to just exist as a normal person. As a result, she practically turned into a ghost, throwing up barriers so massive that her vast riches leave her completely and totally stranded. A pair of ladies across two eras, sitting on billions of dollars, yet totally secluded. It is the exact same narrative echoing through time with minor tweaks, a repeating disaster featuring a fresh cast. Christina hunted endlessly for a romance she could never lock down. Her kid is actively dodging an inheritance she despised. Meanwhile, that iconic title, which used to scream ultimate status, glitz, and unimaginable cash, has morphed into a completely different symbol today. Pure grief and total isolation. The exact brand of agony that cash cannot stop, and popularity only intensifies. If a hex actually existed here, it was not that these relatives passed away so early. The real nightmare was sticking around just long enough to realize that their massive empires fell incredibly short of providing what they actually required. That the massive pile of cash meant to be their grand prize was secretly a massive anchor. That sitting on piles of cash and actually feeling good about life often completely cancel each other out, particularly when your riches drag along crazy demands, brutal disasters, and a reputation that feels significantly heavier than any financial portfolio. The older heiress really attempted to push back against it. She walked down the aisle, split up, and tied the knot over and over. She handled the corporate empire, lived it up on their private island, and had a little girl she prayed would finally snap the dark pattern. Ultimately, though, that crushing pressure just proved entirely too heavy to bear. Between the prescription meds, the soda binges, extreme weight loss fads, profound sadness, and the non-stop isolation of being the final heir, it all took her out at 37. The daughter took notes on that downfall. She actively picked a secluded life rather than going to war, preferring to stay entirely off the radar instead of battling the machine. She remains the wealthiest lady the general public knows absolutely nothing about. Honestly, that looks to be precisely her game plan. Fading into obscurity, getting zero bother from outsiders, and literally being anybody other than a member of that dynasty. Looking at it, that might just be the most heartbreaking wrap-up possible. Realizing that the finale to this massive saga of maritime fortunes, international business, and iconic reputations boils down to a 40-year-old lady who simply desires to be given total peace alongside her ponies. A woman who blew her whole existence running away from the single absolute truth she cannot outrun. Sharing DNA with that legendary Greek tycoon. The tragic downfall of the Onassis women was never about going bankrupt or losing their companies. Their wealth remains completely intact while the family business thrives. The true ruin happened internally. It was a gradual breaking down of two lives, suffocated by massive pressure, unimaginable grief, and a legacy offering the world but delivering only suffering. Christina and her child, Athena, spent their lifetimes hunting for what no fortune could purchase. Each ultimately discovered that inheriting that legendary name practically guaranteed a life of absolute, heartbreaking isolation. Hit that like button and subscribe to our page right now to ensure that you always catch our next incredible deep dives.